As a creative aspect, TV is one of the best things that we do as a species. Along with music and film and books, they bring out the best creative of all of us. They entertain and they bring so much joy to many. They invoke emotion and enable us to feel things that we bury sometimes deep down. That's what this podcast is for. Welcome to A Million Little TV Shows. This is what I call the breakdown while I break down. Each week I will go through a different TV show, a different season of that TV show, and different episodes of that show. And I will break down not only emotions, but I will break down stories from my life, and let you know why these TV shows mean so much to me, and why I believe that they are some of the most important shows out there. This podcast is here to highlight a lot of smaller TV shows, or TV shows that don't really get a platform, because we know of a bunch of TV shows that get a multitude of different podcasts. Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, The Office, they've all got several podcasts out there analysing all types of different things. But there's not many out there for the little guy, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. So each week I will go through a different show, different seasons, different episodes, and I will go across all different kinds of genres and different countries to bring you what I believe is some of the best TV out there. So I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're here for this journey. And if you've watched the shows before and you wanted to come here and get an analysis on them and have someone go through them and pick out bits that you might have enjoyed, then I'm glad you are here. If, however, you have never watched the show and you just want to come and have someone talk in your ear about different TV shows, I'm glad you are here. But I hope that it inspires some people to go and seek out these TV shows. They deserve to be watched. They were made with love and care, and they are the same as this podcast, made with love and care. I am your host, Mike, and I will take you through every adventure, every horror, every piece of drama, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now the final episode of Season 10, Episode 13, and we're going to be going back down the Oregon Trail to catch up with the guys on the wagon train that are trying to cross the country and make a better life for themselves, way back in the 1800s. But as I've said before, I've thoroughly enjoyed this series so far. I think it's hilarious. I really do. And I cannot wait to get back into it. It's been such a fun story so far, and just the dynamic between the characters is always interesting to me. I like to see how they interact together, and especially when you've got someone like Steve Buscemi in there who is, he's a megastar. If you don't know Steve Buscemi, you probably do, you just don't realise who the name is. But when you actually see him and you know the kind of things that he's been in, either things like Reservoir Dogs or The Big Lebowski, or to even things like Boardwalk Empire, he's a well-known and well-established person and name, and to come into something as goofy as this just seems a bit weird, but he works it so well and does it so well that he pulls it off. And him playing off against Daniel Radcliffe and Geraldine Viswanathan, it's so much fun to watch these young actors getting the experience of playing against someone like Steve Buscemi. So, a lot more to go at in the last 3 episodes, but let's get into it. This is Miracle Workers, Season 3, Episodes 8 to 10. Episode 8, Over the Mountain. And so, with all the trials and tribulations that the group has had so far, at some point we were going to come to them going over a mountain. However, just before this, they are heading across the desert, and they are having a rough time of things. They run out of water, and, of course, hallucinations start. However, they aren't in as much trouble as the gunslinger, because Benny and the Reverend find him, and he is at this point hallucinating so much that he is actually thinking that he's swimming in a pool with all his friends around him. And so to save the poor guy, Benny and the Reverend take pity on him and take him with them. Even though he's been hunting Benny all this time, Benny is now looking after this guy. Eventually they get to the mountain and they've got to go over it, like it says in the title. But just as they're getting ready to tackle this mountain, everyone's basically getting the wagons ready, and they ask where the Reverend and Prudence are. It turns out that the Reverend and Prudence are actually in Todd's carriage. They are having Bible study lessons, which at first when we see Todd and he hears about these Bible study lessons, he seems quite suspicious of what's going on. Of course they say Bible studies, but what they actually mean is they're having sex. None of the crew knows that they are together, but that is the Reverend and Prudence's cover. Of course, this makes Phaedra so proud of her husband because she is helping this woman find God. And he is. She's screaming, "Oh God," quite a lot, but not in the way that Phaedra thinks. And so Todd heads over to his carriage. He finds them just after having sex, basically sat up in bed, both naked. Todd's such an idiot that he doesn't understand what's going on and basically says, "Thank you so much for giving her your time. You are such a good man and you are trying to get us across the country, but also you are trying to help my wife be a better person." The Reverend mentions something about he can't believe how much they've been getting away with this, and that at some point punishment will come for them, but it seems like they've been getting away with it so far. Just then, the camp is invaded by Trigg's gang. Trigg takes Benny and she threatens to kill him. Essentially, all over the news, all the headlines read that Trigg is Benny the Teen's daughter, and that she's nothing like her dad, or she's not as good as her dad, or she's walking in his footsteps. And she's pissed off with the fact that she's still being compared to him, even though she's much better, or much badder in this case. But as in most things, when the villain actually starts shouting their monologue of what they're going to do, of course, they're going to end up getting caught out. Because the Reverend and Prudence have actually heard the commotion, they come over, and they end up knocking Trigg out. When Trigg awakes, obviously, they have the gunslinger there with them, and so he has arrested them. And so he's going to take them to Oregon, and he's going to collect the reward. Throughout the episode, we keep seeing that Benny has really turned a corner since his time with the Native Americans, and he really just wants to help people out and do the right thing now. And he's sort of become a little bit of a preacher himself. In fact, after watching Loudermilk and then seeing Steve Buscemi playing a similar character, he is trying to help people, but doing it in his own way, which is hilarious to see, because as much as Benny thinks he's changed, he's not really changed. He still talks about himself a lot. But because of all the luck that they've been having, including the fact that they've taken down Trigg and managed to get her arrested, Prudence and the Reverend think that they're faultless in what's going on. That it doesn't matter what they've been doing, they can carry on their affair as much as they want because God doesn't care. As that leaves the Reverend's lips, instantly a bolt of lightning comes out of the sky on a clear day and strikes an oxen dead. This was their lead oxen and was the one that they were using for most of the journey. And so now they're going to have to pull the wagons themselves. They begin walking up the mountain and pulling these wagons along with them. However, as they're doing so, all of a sudden a wheel breaks, and we learn that it's the third wheel that day that is broken, and the people of the wagon train start to believe that they are cursed. And of course, the Reverend believes that as well. When he goes and speaks to Prue about this, she tries to assuage his fears and tell him that everything's going to be okay. They're not cursed at all, and maybe they could meet up later and maybe give a little prayer to God, if you get what I mean. And while she's doing this, she's actually holding back one of the young boys who is part of the wagon train, and he has been possessed by a demon. So, on one hand, he's going to get sex, but on the other, he knows that this isn't right. Something is going wrong here, and God is proving himself as someone who isn't to be messed with in this situation. And so the Reverend believes that he needs to be punished while he's pleasuring. So he comes up with a device that every time that they make out is going to hit him in the balls. However, once he does it once, he realises that this isn't going to work throughout. Prudence says that she doesn't want to do this, she just wants to make out with him, and when they start making out, all of a sudden the earth starts shaking. There is a rock slide on the mountain that they are currently on, and the Reverend runs outside. He gets on his knees and he prays to God and tells him that he's sorry for everything that he's done, he's sorry for the affair that he's been having with Prudence, and he will make amends in whatever way that God needs him to, and he will stop all of this because he doesn't want to die. He doesn't want the people to die, but he doesn't want to die, most certainly. And after a few moments, God stops everything. Benny the Teen at this point has been trying to rehabilitate the actual people in Trigg's group, and essentially trying to make sure that they live a better life, the way that he has been doing. However, all Trigg wants is just to get these handcuffs off of her and leave this wagon train behind. After the Reverend's confession, Prudence is pissed off with him and walks off because he's disrespected their relationship, and now he's also outed her as having an affair. And of course, he's done it in front of everybody. So now her husband knows and his wife knows. Everyone sides with Phaedra and decide that the Reverend has to do some sort of penance. But because of the betrayal that Todd has felt, he ends up going and speaking to Trig. Trig convinces him that he can help her and she can help him. They can get away from this wagon train, but first he's got to untie her. He does so, and they end up kidnapping Prue, and while they're still pulling this wagon train up this hill, Todd ends up wrecking it and making them drop the whole thing, and it rolls back down the mountain and ends up smashing into pieces. So now they've got no wagon train, and Todd and Trig have ended up running off with a kidnapped Prudence, and so now the mission is to get them back. Episode 9, Stranded. And so after being left by Trig and Todd up on the mountain, the group actually come across some bad weather, and they have to haul up in a cabin up on the mountain until this passes. However, while they're snowed in, things just aren't getting better for the group. It seems like they've been there for weeks and they are going slightly mad. Benny says that they can pull through and that no one's going to die, and then all of a sudden someone drops dead. But at this point, the reason that people think they're going to die is because they're just so hungry. And so they decide to actually eat the person who's died, but Benny is trying to be a moral compass to them. The Reverend is nowhere to be seen right now, and Benny's just like, we can't do this. The Reverend would talk us out of this. The Reverend would make sure that we didn't do anything like this. He heads out and he goes and finds the Reverend. Again, the Reverend is putting himself through some sort of penance and is living outside in a makeshift tent. When Benny speaks to him and tells him that maybe he should come back inside and actually be a part of the group again, the Reverend heads in. However, once he gets inside and Benny thinks the Reverend's going to be on his side, it turns out he's not. He tells them that God has turned his back on him and that he hasn't spoken to him for days, and he's abandoned him, and he's abandoned them on this mountain. And so, if they want to eat a person, they should eat them. He sits down at the table and he starts chowing down on this guy, and everyone else starts to join it. The only person who doesn't is Benny, because he can't believe that they've come to this. Of course, once they end up finishing the person who's died, they then start looking around at who's next. Benny cannot believe the madness that's going on, and he actually goes up on the roof and pretends to be God, speaking through the chimney and telling them, look, this isn't the way that things should be done, and you should use your moral compass and actually live your life the way that I taught you. But of course, the Reverend sees straight through it and knows that it's Benny. Eventually, Benny goes back into the house, and it seems like the Reverend has organised everyone to actually do certain jobs when it comes to cooking. However, when it's revealed that it's going to be one of the children that they're actually going to eat, Benny just can't stand it anymore. He sees a huge pot of boiling water and knows that's where the kid's going to end up, and gets in it as if it's a bath. At this point, everyone in the group rejects eating Benny, and he tries to talk them round. He manages to get them to see the error of their ways and that they can get through this if they just believe hard enough, and the storm will pass and they will get off this mountain, but they just have to hold on. They have to have hope, and they can't just go around eating people, and especially not children. And so once they manage to see the error of their ways, they decide that it's not going to be too long, and as they say that, the storm breaks, and they know that they have to do one thing now. They have to get to Oregon, and they have to save Prue. She, however, has obviously gone to Oregon now with both Trig and Todd. Once they get there, though, it's a utopia. Everyone is happy, everyone has enough money. Trig doesn't ever feel the need to rob, but the reason that she doesn't want to is because it's boring. She could just literally point a gun at people and say, give me your money, and they will. And then the next day that person will end up with just as much money. There is plenty of money, there is plenty of gold. There is actually no reason for them to be outlaws anymore. But Trig just cannot get over this. And so when she sees the mayor come through town and he says that he's going to have 4 more years if they vote for him in this upcoming election, Trig gets an idea. She knows that as a woman, and she's black, she wouldn't be able to go for this because America wouldn't go for it. It's odd how poignant this episode is when you actually think about it. And so she goes for someone rich and dumb. She brings in Todd. Todd ends up running on really stupid slogans and brings out merchandise. Does this sound familiar yet? And he runs on bad policies, and he's an insult to everyone, and he even keeps Prudence locked up in a cage. Even when Prudence tries to tell them who this guy is, the people of the town just don't care, and they want to vote for this guy because he seems like a good character. And so on election day, Prudence tells him, look, you're not going to get away with this. Eventually, she tricks him into thinking that she's in love with him. And as she does, she knees him in the nuts and runs away. She runs out into the street and she literally tells everyone in the street that she's not a happy wife. He's been keeping her in a cage. He's not a good guy. He's a joke and he doesn't deserve to be governor. But the people still vote for him. He ends up being governor and Trig ends up getting the policies that she wants written into law. Again, does this sound familiar? And so now Prue can only hope that the Reverend and the rest of the crew are going to turn up and actually sort out this town again to make it the ideal place that it was before. Because now the buildings are on fire, there is rioting in the streets, and people with masked faces are literally tying people up. Again, does it sound familiar? And finally, for the end of this season of A Million Little TV Shows podcast and this season of Miracle Workers, episode 10, End of the Trail. Benny, the Reverend, and the group actually reach Oregon, but by now it is a hellscape. In fact, they actually smell it before they can find it because it is basically burnt to the ground when they get there. Once they head into town, however, they come across the man who was previously the governor there, and he tells them what happened. He tells them that he knows Prudence and that he knows Todd. He also tells them that Trig has helped them take over the land. And he also tells them that Todd is held up in the governor's mansion and Trig's group are actually his security from now on. And so the Reverend and Benny actually have to come up with a plan to break into the mansion. Benny says that he will take on Trig and that the Reverend will have to get inside and go and find Prudence. Once inside, however, he finds that the governor's mansion has turned into essentially a den of inequity. And Todd is now playing the part of some sort of Nero-type figure, where he is literally watching Rome burn as he gets his pleasures. Prudence is still sat in her cage, and now she just doesn't care anymore. All she wanted was Zeke to turn up and save the day, and he hasn't by now. And she fears that he has now died on the mountain. The Reverend is told that he can't just walk into this governor's party, he must be dressed up. And so he heads off and ends up in this sort of Princess Jasmine type outfit. He comes in and straight away Todd doesn't care if this person's man or woman or what they are. He wants to find out through his own means. And he cannot actually wait to get with the Reverend, not knowing that it is the Reverend at this point. It's only throughout the Reverend's performance that he actually finds out who it is. By which point, however, this was all a distraction so that Prudence could actually get the keys for her cage so she could break out. And eventually Todd forces the Reverend to go outside with him so that they can go meet with Trig. Trig, however, has managed to bump into Benny the teen. At this point, she is literally playing with a cannon in the town square. And Benny tells her, look, I've brought a team of people and we're willing to fight for what we believe in. However, Trig's numbers are way too big. So partway through the fight, when Benny realises that he's not going to win, he calls Trig's bluff. He tells her that they should do this the old-fashioned way and just a one-on-one shoot-off between the two of them. They do the whole 10 paces, and when Benny turns around, before Trig can actually shoot, he just drops his gun. She wonders what the hell he's doing, and it's all a ruse from Benny. He says that I know I can't beat you, so just do what you need to do. But just know that I think of you as a daughter and that I always will. And essentially he plays to her good side. It's unbelievable after all the destruction that she's done that she's got one, but she does. And she ends up running into her dad's arms. So when Todd comes outside with the Reverend and tells Trig to kill him, Trig says, no, I don't take orders from you anymore. This isn't what I want and I've changed. Todd realises that for once in his life he's going to have to do something himself and pulls a gun on the Reverend. At that point we hear the voice of Prudence and she tells him that essentially back off and get away from my man. Prudence is stood by the cannon and it goes off and kills Todd. The Reverend and Prudence reconcile and we find out which way the characters are going to be going from now on. Benny has decided to leave Oregon and go back on the trail with Trig. He is going to be her number 2 and she's going to lead the group. However, when they tell the Reverend of their plan, that they're going to drive a train into the White House, that the Reverend says, that's not a good idea, I think that's stupid. But they're going to go off and do it anyway. The gunslinger is just going to head off and become the bounty hunter that he's always been, and then Phaedra comes to see the Reverend. She asks him if he wants to come to Florida with her. In fact, he and Prudence want to come because Oregon isn't what it was all cracked up to be. He tells her, no, we're going to stay here and we're going to make something of this. He says he doesn't believe in the American dream anymore, but if they can make the area just that little bit better that they're in and make their own paradise where they are, then life can surely be better. And so he and Prudence decide to stay in Oregon and build it up and make it better. And that's it. That's the end of the Oregon Trail and the end of Miracle Workers Season 3, and I've really enjoyed this series. It said a lot about the current political climate and the way things are and the way things are going, and sometimes it can be really scary. As much levity as this does it with, watching somewhere like Oregon, which was essentially the dream of America for a lot of people, and sort of how people saw America for a long, long time, being turned into a hellscape, which is kind of running parallel to the way that the world is right now. It's a worry, because it's certain people that are rising up and making the world hurt, and it's not fair. People should be able to live together in peace, harmony, and just look after each other. Yeah, we're not always going to be able to love thy neighbour, as the Bible says, because sometimes our neighbours are a little annoying. Mine aren't. Mine are great. And they're actually Polish, so I like that about them as well. I think that's great. I love the diversity of the country that I live in. And that was always the dream of America, that it was a diverse place, that people could live in harmony together and they could build communities and work alongside each other. And I think it's so important to actually get back to that American dream and, in some ways, a British dream. And, you know, there's a lot of other places that really need seeing a way forward. But currently it feels like we're going backwards. It feels like we're going back to a time when certain figures rose up and scary times happened. And all I want in this world is to enjoy my life. I don't want to live in any sort of fear or feel angry because of the way that the world is treating me. And I have been angry at the way the world has treated me at times, but never to the point when I've blamed someone else or blamed the system that we currently work in. And I just hope that in the coming 3 years, the things start to right themselves, because this world is so much better when we work together. And if people are paying their way and working hard and paying their taxes and doing everything that is necessary for a functioning society to work, then I don't understand why we're not all striving for that. Is it difficult when money's tight? Yes, of course it is. I understand that. But it's not the fault of a poor immigrant coming to your country. Maybe you should look further up the ladder at the people that are running the place and covering certain houses in gold. The world's scary, and I just don't think that it should be as scary as it is right now. And hopefully this is the turning point. Hopefully now things will happen and people will see the way that the world is before we end up back in 1945. However, I think we should just talk more about this amazing show, because some of the things that just came out of it, some of the themes that came out of it, of this poor man who is a reverend of a starving town, and throughout this journey they end up crossing rivers and going over mountains and meeting new people and being robbed and finding the place that they actually wanted to get to after all this time, but not actually being able to enjoy it until the very end. And it just shows how sometimes these things can break your spirit. These things can make you feel like it isn't worth it, but it is. Because in the end, he got what he wanted. He ended up with the girl. He ended up at the end of the Oregon Trail. And yes, okay, he's going to have to do some work on the town that he's now living in, but do you know what? It's going to be worth it in the end. But yeah, I've loved this show, and I've loved Miracle Workers, as I've said throughout the other 2 episodes that I've done on this. I love it. I think it's so funny. I think the cast is so well cast. And they play these goofballs, these utter goofballs, so well. I think John Bass deserves more praise than he actually gets from me, because the characters that he's played in both this and, you know, the Newsroom, he was a slimy fuck, and I didn't like him. But I find the show brings out such a good and funny character from him. And yeah, I've loved this show. I cannot wait to do season 4. I know what comes in season 4, and it's very weird, but very enjoyable. However, I am done for today, and I'm sorry for my little political rant, but sometimes these things I think have to be said. I'm sure you can all understand where I'm coming from when I actually talk about these things. But yeah, this was a great show, and I loved it, and I cannot wait to get into more next season. So let's just reiterate what is coming next season. We've got Kaleidoscope, that is a one-off season. We've got Miracle Worker season 4. We've got Dying for Sex. We've got Louder Milk. And we've got Mindhunter. And that's going to finish those 2 seasons off. So pretty much next season, I'm going to be finishing off a lot of series because Kaleidoscope's one-off, Dying for Sex is a one-off, Miracle Workers, Louder Milk, and Mindhunter are all their final seasons. So we're going to be getting into a lot of new stuff coming up. But as for today, I'm done. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for listening. I hope you're all doing well out there, again, in a very crazy world. But until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. As always, thank you for listening to this podcast, and you could really help me and the podcast by giving a like, share, subscribe on all major platforms that you listen to podcasts on. As an independent podcaster, this will just help me exponentially when it comes to actually doing more things with this podcast. I truly do enjoy this, and I absolutely love revisiting these TV shows with you guys. So any engagement from you is always welcome, and I will try and listen to all of you when you give suggestions or just tell me what you think about the podcast. But once again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.